All right, so let's take a look at these two aircrafts involved in this tragic collision. On the left, a standard PSA Airlines CRJ series jet. It holds up to 78 people. This one held 60 passengers and 4 crew members. Now, at the time of the crash, 3 soldiers on board the Black Hawk helicopter. In a video, newly appointed Department of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said they were taking part in a standard military training flight. Take a listen.
It was an annual proficiency training flight, and when we look at the crew, and not all can have been notified, so we're going to withhold ranks and names at this point. We do know on our side who was involved. It was a fairly experienced crew, and that was doing a required annual night evaluation. They did have night vision goggles.
All right, I want to get right to CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Charlie, thank you for being here. Something to note there, night vision goggles. Are you hearing that there's any reason to believe that those types of goggles could have played a role in all this?
Well, no, first of all, Elizabeth, it was confirmed by officials that we spoke to before we heard from Secretary Hegseth that they were equipped with these night vision goggles. It raises a couple of questions that we're hoping to find out this afternoon as to whether or not that would have helped the situation and helped their vision. That's not necessarily a slam dunk, because night vision goggles in a built-up urban area can be very distracting. I mean, I've worn them myself. I've used them myself. They give a sort of greenish hue to things. And as we've already established, it was a clear night last night, and you've got an aircraft on approach. So whether or not you'd have to use night goggles to identify that aircraft is the question we'll try to find the answer to. Another part of that, you heard the secretary say this was a training program. Like, part of that training and part of that yearly assessment, and it's not necessarily a training assessment, training as we would know it, but the annual proficiency training flight. So this is really a sort of review. And as part of that review, as I understand it, that would include not only using night vision goggles, but not using night vision goggles as part of that training review. But it was something that President Trump brought up as well, and he said that it may not have helped. And I just have to point out a couple of things. You know, this is early on in this investigation. Arguably, it hasn't even begun yet. Yet there was a lot of, I'll use the word blame, heaped on the helicopter pilot. So he called it a confluence of bad decisions. He said it was a pilot problem, referring to the helicopter pilot. He called the angle and the path of the helicopter unbelievably bad. The helicopter had the ability to stop, go up, down, or turn. The helicopter had clear vision of the plane. Adjustments weren't made. They shouldn't have been at the same height. That's self-evident. That's something also that Secretary Hegseth brought up. He referred to it as an elevation issue. And in that pre-tape statement, he didn't want to name rank. We can do that now. We don't have the names of the people. A young captain, staff sergeant, and chief warrant officer. What's kind of interesting there is normally in a Black Hawk helicopter, you'd have a crew of 4. So that's just, once again, it's 2 more eyes that weren't in the cockpit of that helicopter when that incident happened.
You know, Ed brought up this point again, as did Caitlin, that these types of annual night evaluations, this is very routine. This is something that people who live in the area, who are around that area, are used to hearing at night. I mean, how often is this going on? Is this something that happens year-round? Different pilots come in and go through these evaluations?
Yeah, you know, Elizabeth, I've just moved here, right, maybe 7 months ago from overseas, and I was astonished at the amount of activity from these helicopters because I was listening to Ed's report there. Yeah, I mean, I live in Georgetown. It happens all the time. It is not uncommon to see a couple of Black Hawk helicopters or more, or Marine One, going up and down the Potomac and in the vicinity of the airport. Now, it has already been raised that maybe that's not the best place to have those drills, but the other argument is you need to have those drills because that's exactly the environment that those helicopter pilots and crew are operating in. They are responsible for transportation of personnel and troops in and out of and around the D.C. metropolitan area. So it would stand to reason that any training scheme would have at least an element of focus on there. But those are the questions that are going to come up now about the wisdom of having these annual training reviews around a heavily trafficked, and I can't underline that enough, a heavily trafficked metropolitan airport, which is right downtown. It's less than 10 minutes from the Pentagon. You fly right over the Pentagon when you fly into Reagan National. As anybody who's been here knows, I was astonished by it.
Yeah, and it's high profile as well. And Charlie, before you go, I want to get to more of this recovery and investigation. You know, they're still recovering victims of this crash, over 60 civilians, 3 military service members. I'm curious, how does the military handle this kind of recovery effort and investigation? What role are they playing right now?
Right. So it is a mammoth task. We had been reporting overnight. I was at the Potomac overnight after this had happened. I got there. So we had 300 first responders, and that was a sort of multi-state effort. But yes, Secretary Hegseth said that Army CID, Army investigators, would be part of this investigation because normally they have their own department that would investigate if there is a military aircraft, in this case an Army aircraft, that has been involved in a mishap, an accident, an incident, what have you. Where it blurs a little bit, and they made clear here, is this will be driven by the NTSB. So this will be to augment some of that investigation. Highly skilled investigators will be working with the NTSB and the FAA in trying to determine exactly what happened. But they'll want to know if the helicopter and crew are to blame, or for whatever reason, again, this elevation seems to be the biggest problem, and again, that's self-evident. They'll want to determine whether the aircraft and the crew were flying within that permitted envelope, and therefore should have been out of harm's way.
Yeah, and the communication between air traffic control, and it goes on from there. Senior National Security Correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Charlie, thank you so much for being with us.